They're somewhat complex. I don't have the full list. I think one of the key things is that they would have to further the purpose of the measure.
Okay.
There are also some, for some of these pots of funding, the legislature could not reduce them below a certain amount, I believe. But I'm sorry, I don't have a list of the complete.
That's fine. That's fine. And I know, I don't know that we're, I want to talk just a question about the budget trailer language. So you look at, you have the MMRSA, you have AUMA, and you have the budget trailer language. So the effect of the budget trailer language, should that be passed and adopted, how will that potentially interact with AUMA, and what major differences are there in that process? So I guess my question is, if the budget trailer language passes, changing the entire MMRSA framework, how consistent is that with AUMA, and what would that interaction be?
Yeah, so in our review of the proposed trailer bill language, there doesn't appear to be anything that would be a very significant departure from what's in the initiative. I think one key thing we did notice is that the proposed trailer bill language would move the responsibility for regulating testing facilities from Department of Public Health to the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation. Under this measure, the Department of Public Health would be doing the testing. And so you could have a situation, if that trailer bill language passes and the initiative passes, where you have split responsibilities depending on if it's medical or non-medical in terms of who's doing the testing.
Got it. Thank you. And members, just to remind you, we're 5 minutes over now. Mr. Lackey,
I'll be quick.
Question.
Yeah, my question is, how much tax revenue can we really expect to collect, given that banking access remains a major problem for any business that's cannabis related? Is our process equipped to handle payments this large in cash?
So that is one of the unknown factors, I think, and depending on whether federal policy changes, will certainly affect that. But I think at this point in time, we haven't completed an analysis of how the state's set up to handle these cash payments. We understand that right now there is some process in place for BOE to collect taxes in cash from medical marijuana businesses, so there is some precedent from this. It certainly presents a logistical challenge, I think. But what we've seen in terms of the collecting under the current medical system and in the collection from other states that have legalized non-medical, I think there are some workarounds, although it does present some serious challenges.
And Mr. Lackey, I believe there's pending legislation at the federal level as well to deal with this. Mr. Wachowski, please.
Section 10 of the Act, entitled Amendments, seems to indicate that the legislature, by a simple majority vote, may repeal provisions to further reduce the penalties associated with this act. One could read that as saying that we couldn't increase the penalties that affect marijuana, driving under the influence. Is that the LAO's opinion?
Well, I'm not sure that we've provided a formal opinion on that. I'm not an attorney, but I think that does appear to be the case in my reading.
Okay, thank you. Hearing and seeing no more questions, Mr. Edwards, is there anything you'd like to conclude with?
No.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead and bring up panelists for the presentation by proponents of the initiative. We have the managing partner at Olson Hagel and Fishburne, Richard Madich, I believe. Alice Huffman, president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, California State Conference. Glenn Bex, director for the California Capital Office of Drug Policy Alliance. Nate Bradley, executive director for the California Cannabis Industry Association. Diane Goldstein, retired lieutenant commander, Redondo Beach Police Department, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Janice Norman, senior vice president, Centers for Governmental Relations and Political Operations with California Medical Association. And let me just remind everybody, I believe the way we have this is a 5-minute presentation. That way we allow for time for questions by members on the dais. So I will alert you when you have a minute left in your 5-minute presentation, just so that we're fair to both the proponents and the opponents of the measure. So let's go ahead and begin with Mr. Madich. Thank you, Mr. Madich. Please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Madich. I'm a partner at the law firm of Olson, Hagel, and Fishburne and campaign counsel for the AUMA initiative. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today about the initiative. The AUMA is a balanced, research-based, and consensus-driven initiative that, broadly speaking, seeks to accomplish 4 goals. The first goal, to end the illicit market for marijuana in California and replace it with a tightly regulated market that will ensure safe and responsible access to marijuana for adults 21 years and over. Secondly, to put in place the strongest of its kind protections to prevent persons under the age of 21 from obtaining marijuana or being exposed to marijuana products or advertisements, and to prevent illegal diversion of marijuana out of California. Thirdly, to provide financial resources necessary to fully fund the activities of the state agencies the initiative charges with regulating the adult use market for marijuana, and additional revenues for chronically underfunded programs for youth-focused drug education, prevention and treatment, environmental protection and restoration, and state and local law enforcement. Finally, to allow the legislature and regulators flexibility to continue adopting best practices for the purposes of controlling and regulating adult use marijuana after the initiative passes. Our group came to the drafting table with no preconceived ideas about how to best accomplish these goals. Instead, we engaged in a year-long effort to engage literally hundreds of stakeholders around the state, at the local level and at the national level, including the California Medical Association, the California Chamber of Commerce, the League of Cities, CSAC, the Rural Counties, the Drug Policy Alliance, CCIA, the NAACP, and environmental groups. We closely followed the work of the Lieutenant Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Marijuana Policy and adopted many of the recommendations made by that panel of experts. We researched experiences with adult use marijuana legalization in other states like Colorado and Washington to understand what worked and what didn't work in those states. And of course, we also monitored the historic legislation enacted by the legislature and signed by the governor to finally establish a regulatory framework for medical marijuana. In fact, we solicited and received technical feedback during the process for the AUMA from state legislators and the administration, including the CHP and the Board of Equalization. With respect to what the AUMA does, the AUMA legalizes limited amounts of marijuana for adults 21 years and older, but maintains and strengthens protections for the public. For example, you heard from the LAO the limits on smoking marijuana in public, but it's not just smoking, it's also ingesting marijuana. Marijuana comes in other forms, for example, edibles. You can't ingest edibles while you're driving or riding as a passenger in a car. You can't ingest edibles in public. You can't have open containers of marijuana or marijuana edibles in your car. And finally, the AUMA explicitly maintains other state laws that make it professional negligence, for example, for a doctor or other professionals to perform services while impaired. It allows property owners and landlords to continue prohibiting marijuana use on their premises and continues to allow business owners to maintain drug-free workplaces, including through periodic testing of employees for marijuana use. With respect to the regulatory structure that we established in the initiative, we utilize the same agencies designated under MRSA and simply expand their duties to include regulation and control of adult use marijuana. We did this intentionally to leverage the knowledge and experience gained by the regulators of medical marijuana as a springboard for regulation of adult use. Just like under MRSA, the paramount consideration for regulators of adult use marijuana will be protection of the public health and safety. In fact, the initiative contains many of the same public protection provisions as MRSA and even adds a few. The cultivation, manufacture, distribution, and sale of adult use marijuana will only be done by licensed businesses. Licensees will be required to adhere to all applicable state laws, including labor laws and environmental protections, as well as any applicable local laws. Failure to adhere to state and local laws is grounds for suspension and ultimately revocation of a state license under the initiative. Adult use marijuana products will be comprehensively tested and licensed by independent laboratories, just like under the medical legislation. And adult use marijuana and marijuana products will be packaged in child-resistant containers and bear labels that provide even more information than the labels prescribed under MRSA to help adults use marijuana in a safe and responsible way. For example, under the initiative, labels are required to provide warnings against marijuana use while pregnant, and for edibles to contain an express warning that the effects of those products can be delayed for several hours. To incentivize entry into the legal regulated adult market, the AUMA provides businesses that are complying with the state's medical laws will be the first in line to obtain and apply for a non-medical license. But even so, I want to be clear that no one is entitled to a business license under the AUMA. To the contrary, following the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission, the AUMA gives state regulators extensive power to deny a license application or renewal based on factors reasonably related to that determination, including but not limited to whether granting the application or renewal would allow unreasonable restraints on competition or creation or maintenance of an unlawful monopoly power, aid in the continuation of the illicit market for marijuana in California or in other states, encourage underage use or adult abuse of marijuana, present a risk of minors being exposed to marijuana, or result in violations of any environmental protection laws. With this broad authority, the initiative empowers regulators to prevent monopolization of the adult use market in California by large corporations and gives regulators the flexibility so they can make fully informed, on-the-ground assessments of who should receive an adult use license. In a similar vein, the AUMA presumptively disqualifies from licensure applicants who have previously been convicted of drug trafficking or using minors in illegal marijuana activities. Just like the medical legislation, however, the AUMA allows regulators to exercise their discretion to determine that a person with a less serious prior drug offense should continue to be permitted to apply for a license. The AUMA's regulatory structure also fully respects local control. We consulted with the League of Cities numerous times during the drafting process to ensure that the measure's provisions maintain and preserve the power of local governments to decide whether or not they wish to allow adult use marijuana businesses from being established or operated in their boundaries. Finally, to prepare for adult use legalization, the AUMA provides for a public information program ahead of legalization through the Department of Healthcare Services to educate the public about the new laws concerning responsible adult use of marijuana. As you heard earlier from the LAO, the initiative imposes a state tax on cultivation and a state excise tax on the retail sale of adult use marijuana, with estimated annual revenues generated from those taxes reaching $1 billion or more annually. Again, following the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission, the AUMA dedicates these revenues to four main purposes. First, supporting the activities of the state agencies charged with regulating medical marijuana and adult use marijuana, and providing funding to CHP to research and develop best practices to determine when a person is driving while impaired. Secondly, we provide new revenues to the Department of Public Health and the Department of Education for youth-focused drug education, prevention, and treatment programs. Among other uses, these funds will support school programs.
I'm just going to let you know you're at 7 minutes now, so that means we might have to take 2 minutes from the rest of the panel.
I will cede some of my time, sir.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Among other uses, these funds will support school-based programs to reduce school dropout rates and provide outreach, prevention, and treatment for youth homelessness. Thirdly, we provide resources necessary for the state environmental protection agencies to remediate the extensive damage caused by the illegal marijuana market, including from water diversion and pesticide contamination, and to protect the environment from future harm. Finally, we provide funds to state and local law enforcement and governments to implement and enforce the AUMA's provisions. After 10 years, as you heard, the legislature can then reallocate those funds. With respect to criminal justice, broadly speaking, the initiative reduces the most low-grade marijuana-related offenses to infractions or misdemeanors, but continues to preserve prosecutors' ability to continue charging the most serious crimes as felonies, including sales to minors, trafficking, and illegal grows on public lands. And finally, the last point I wanted to make is that during the drafting process, we were very cognizant of best practices continue to develop in this area. We can't predict everything with precision up front. And so the initiative has a very generous amendment clause that allows the legislature to continue implementing its terms after it's been passed, including to conform with any potential changes under the medical legislation.
Thank you. That's important for the budget trailer language we just spoke about as well. Please, let's move on to Ms. Huffman. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Alice Huffman. I'm the president of the California State NAACP and national board member of the oldest and most effective civil rights organization in the country. For more than 106 years, we have been working hard to eliminate racial prejudice and ensure the political, education, social, and economic rights of minority citizens in the United States. As leaders of the California NAACP, it is our mission to eradicate injustice and continue to fight for civil rights and social justice wherever and whenever we can. We are therefore compelled to speak out against the war on drugs waged against our citizens by the federal government. To be clear, this is not a war. This is not a war on drug lords and violent cartels. This is a war that has disproportionately affected young men and young women, and represent the latest tool for imposing the Jim Crow justice on poor African Americans. Law enforcement strategies that target poor blacks and Latinos and cause them to bear the burden and shame of arrest, prosecution, and conviction for cannabis offenses must stop. Evidence has shown that cannabis law enforcement in California disproportionately targets our youth. Black youth use cannabis at a lower rate than whites. In every one of the 25 largest counties in California, blacks are arrested for cannabis possession at rates higher than whites, typically double, triple, or even quadruple. Even the recent steps to lower penalties for cannabis possession still can start a criminal record that can follow a person throughout his or her life. Black youth are disproportionately likely to be affected by the permanent stigmatization that comes from a criminal record. A simple cannabis possession charge and a $100 ticket starts a rap sheet that can leave an individual with a permanent record as a drug offender, which can easily be searched by employers, landlords, schools, credit agencies, licensing boards, and banks. Given the current economic crisis and high level of unemployment, particularly for black men, our existing cannabis laws remain an obstacle to a person's ability to get an education, make a decent living, and have a productive life, all because they use cannabis. Moreover, there must be laws to provide an easy pathway into the legitimate market for black and brown people who have lived on the underground economy of cannabis for so long. Enforcement of drug-level crimes have fostered a new level of slavery between African Americans and the current privatized prison industrial complex. We cannot afford to sacrifice another generation of our young men and women to this misguided war on drugs. Enough really is enough. It is time we follow the lead of Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and others that have declared, and Washington, D.C. even, our current strategy is a failure. Luckily, we have been presented with another way, a better way. We can reform our cannabis policy to help ensure our youth get the future they want and deserve. We can invest in people, not prisons. The Adult Use of Marijuana Act sends an important message that California is ready to end the failed war on drugs by discriminating and regulating cannabis to save our community. Proponents of this measure took the time to get it right, I must say. They consulted with a large number of stakeholders, including the NAACP, which is a rarity, criminal justice reform and advocates who have been shut out of having input into the policy arena at an early age. They've also taken steps to ensure that much of the money raised will go back and be invested in our communities and programs that need it the most and have been most dramatically affected. How much time I have?
4 minutes.
Left?
You're at 4 minutes now. You have a minute left.
Okay, let me go to the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. We believe this is common sense reform. We believe that when this initiative becomes law, it will be good for all Californians. It will reduce crime in the inner city, treat those with addiction as patients instead of criminals, make it more difficult for our youth to obtain cannabis. Now they can get it anytime they want it. Provide economic opportunities for those in the community who wish to participate and create job opportunities. How do I know this? Because I didn't eat my turkey on Thanksgiving dinner. I read all 65 pages of this initiative, and I found every barrier they had in there for my community, and I communicated it back to the campaign. They fixed everyone. That's why I know it's a good initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. So let's go ahead and move on to the next, Mr. Bex, who's also conceded a couple of minutes of his time.
That's right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Glenn Backus for Drug Policy Action. There are many reasons that our organization supports the AUMA. We call it ALMA. Drug Policy Action is a national policy organization dedicated to ending the war on drugs and replacing it with policies based on science, compassion, health, and human rights. Our organization believes it's rational to stop wasting scarce law enforcement resources chasing people and punishing people for growing, transporting, or selling cannabis. We don't want cops wasting their time and our tax dollars chasing after cannabis. We believe it's rational as well as compassionate to stop ruining families and ruining people's futures by burdening them with felonies for possessing a small amount of cannabis for sale or growing a few plants for their own use. We trust the science and we trust the research that shows we can do better, that we can protect California kids and California consumers by regulating cannabis as we do tobacco and alcohol, by requiring an ID to show that you're 21 to purchase, which drug dealers just don't do, by requiring sample testing of marijuana to make sure it's free of pesticides, contaminants, and adulterants, by prohibiting advertising to minors, by mandating child-resistant packages, by requiring both state and local licenses and permits to operate, and to keep marijuana out of the corner store, gas stations, and grocery stores. Let's be clear, under ALMA, marijuana will only be available in discrete outlets that are not allowed to sell tobacco, that are not allowed to sell alcohol. You won't see it at the bar, you won't see it at the corner store, and you won't see it at the mini mart. You're not going to go buy eggs with your kids and run into marijuana ads or marijuana. It's a very tight system. We also believe strongly in taxing marijuana for things that we need. We need primary prevention of drug and alcohol use among young people that ALMA will pay for. We need drug and alcohol treatment for young people that ALMA will pay for. We need the community reinvestment that ALMA will pay for to invest in low-income communities to provide job training, job placement, linkages to mental health care and medical care, and more. And as I said, we really want, and Californians want, to stop wasting law enforcement time on marijuana. We have much more serious things to do as a community. It's fashionable to say no one ever goes to jail for marijuana anymore. It's just not true. Every year, 13,000 people are arrested for marijuana felonies in our state. 13,000 go into our court system, our jails, and use up taxpayer resources for marijuana alone. It has to stop, and we'd like to stop diverting resources. By and large, these cases are possession for sale or sale. They're small amounts, and they are disproportionately young men and women of color, black and brown, that are being forced into our system and given a lifetime stigmatization of a felony, which makes it hard to get a job, to invest, to succeed in life. So we believe it's rational and compassionate, as well in the best interest of all Californians, to stop burdening young people with felony convictions. ALMA will remove barriers for low-income people and people with drug priors from working in and investing in the new legal and regulated industry, and invest in job training and job opportunity.
If you could wrap up, please.
Yes, sir. In conclusion, we can do right by our kids. I got two. One's 16, one's 19. I call them at-risk kids because every kid in America is at risk. We have marijuana is not hard for my kids to get. But we can undermine the black market by legalizing. We can stop selling to minors that doesn't ask for ID, that doesn't test for adulterants, and sometimes provides a gateway to illicit drugs. And not because marijuana is a gateway drug. That myth has been debunked. But sometimes drug dealers sell something other than marijuana. We want to separate marijuana from the drug dealing market so they don't run into pills, powders, and other drugs. So ALMA provides economic opportunity for our kids and young people, better schools, better after-school programs, better prevention and treatment, all paid for by legal and regulated and taxed cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Let's go ahead and move on to Mr. Bradley with the California Cannabis Industry Association. Please, Mr. Bradley.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Nate Bradley. I am the Executive Director of the California Cannabis Industry Association. We strive to educate and act as a resource to lawmakers regarding all areas of the cannabis industry. We are also dedicated to addressing issues related to unlawful diversion to minors, driving under the influence, and substance abuse. I was a supporter and I worked on Prop 19 6 years ago, the 2010 ballot measure that would have permitted adult use in this state. That measure was rejected by the voters for numerous reasons. One of the biggest reasons was the voters felt like that initiative didn't have the proper safeguards and protections to protect our kids. The proponents of the AUMA took the lessons learned from Prop 19 and worked hard to listen to the concerns of voters. This measure takes the time to get regulation right and will create a marketplace that is fair, regulated, and will protect our kids from corporate interests like big alcohol and big tobacco that have already shown that they will try and market towards our kids if they have that option to. The AUMA also protects workers. It creates a series of important health, safety, and workplace protections, which will protect workers involved in the cultivation, production, testing, and sale of non-medical marijuana. The AUMA also protects small businesses. AUMA offers protections to ensure the state's marijuana industry remains a collection of small farmers and independent businesses. The average member of my association has 9 to 11 employees. We don't want to see big corporations come in more than anybody else does. We want to make sure that it's not dominated by a few corporate large interests. As the market gets off the ground, the measure ensures, for example, as the market gets off the ground, the measure ensures that no large cultivation licenses can be granted until after 2023, which will allow small farmers time to establish themselves in the market. Even if the state legislature then chooses in 2023 to issue large licenses, large farms will be restricted to the same vertical integration restrictions that we currently have in the MMRSA that was passed last year. Local governments also retain their local control that they were able to get in the MMRSA last year. Although it's a little bit different in this bill, you have to get a state license, but before you can open up in your local areas, you still have to have local permission to operate if they choose to, which is a small switch from the MMRSA, which requires you to get local permission first. But this bill still requires dual licensing if the local government wants you to have a local license. The MMRSA also takes numerous steps to protect the cultivation and production, protect consumers in the cultivation and production of cannabis itself. The Department of Food and Agriculture will establish an organic certification program for marijuana and marijuana products, while the Bureau will create a recognized appellations of origin program showing where cannabis was cultivated, that it was cultivated in a unique area of California, such as Humboldt County or Butte County. I'm proud to have also been involved in the drafting of the MMRSA last year, the medical marijuana legislation that was passed with bipartisan support and signed into law. The strict regulatory structure contained in the AUMA is modeled after the structure that was created in the MMRSA last year, and reflects years of careful thought, includes lessons learned from other states about how to facilitate the transition into a legal adult use market. This comprehensive regulation from seed to sale that will allow a non-medical market to function alongside a more tightly controlled medical market and ensure that small farmers and businesses continue to have a voice and a seat at the table. It also leaves the door open for lawmakers and regulators to fine-tune the reg structure as we go forward. To ensure our marijuana laws continue to prioritize the safety and well-being of Californians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for your testimony. Let's go ahead and move on to Diane Goldstein with the Redondo Beach Police Department.